What happens when the FBI, the agency sworn to remain neutral and protect the law above politics, starts quietly asking its own agents who they voted for? That's not a question pulled from a conspiracy site or political blog. It's what a U.S. senator just accused FBI Director Patel of doing under oath. And the moment it happened, the entire hearing went silent. Because when you strip away the politics, the personal attacks, and the headlines, what's left is a simple but terrifying idea. What if the people trusted to uphold the law are now being tested for loyalty, not to the Constitution, but to power? It all started with a simple statement that cut through the noise.
Personnel decisions shall be based on performance and adherence to the law, and every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments. So I want to just go through a couple scenarios with you to get a sense of whether you think these are examples of politicization of the FBI or making decisions based on the performance and adherence to the law. So, first question. Would hiring FBI agents, analysts, and supervisors from only one political party being politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
We don't ask FBI applicants where their political parties are.
Mr. Patel, do you ask FBI applicants who they voted for?
The FBI does not.
Are you aware that in the lawsuit that Mr. Driscoll filed against you and the FBI, he was asked who he voted for?
Since that lawsuit has been filed, that's ongoing litigation, I'm not able to comment.
Well, but it also means that you just said that what happened in his situation didn't happen. So we will go on to the next question. Let me ask you an even easier one. Does firing agents for working on the cases that they were assigned to and that the president didn't like, is that politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
The FBI doesn't terminate anyone based on case assignments alone.
Has the FBI ever been sued by somebody who felt that they were terminated based on case assignments?
In the entire history of the FBI, I'm sure they have.
No, since your tenure.
I'm sure there's ongoing litigation.
Yes. In fact, there is ongoing litigation. And in fact, people have been asked who they voted for. And in fact, you are running an FBI for the President of the United States rather than the people of the United States, because my questions were not hypotheticals. They are the things you have done during your tenure. And according to a lawsuit filed last week by long-term FBI agents, you fired former acting director Brian Driscoll. He had served with the Bureau for nearly 20 years, earned a Medal of Honor, Medal of Valor for bravery during the dangerous ISIS raid, and had a wealth of crisis response experience and led the FBI's critical incident response group. When the Trump administrations interviewed Mr. Driscoll for that role, they interrogated him about his political leanings and who he voted for in the last 5 elections. Questions Mr. Driscoll refused to answer because those types of questions impermissibly politicized the FBI. You also fired Steve Jensen, who served the FBI for nearly 2 decades and ran critical terrorism, counterintelligence, and organized crime operations, whom you once described as embodying what the American public demands of the FBI. But he was fired because he took part in investigating crimes committed on January 6th. And Trump's MAGA base lambasted you online for keeping him at the FBI. So he's no longer at the FBI. You also fired a decorated combat veteran with decades of experience in the Bureau, Special Agent Walter Jardia, because he worked on the investigation into the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and helped investigate Trump's ally, Peter Navarro. Director Patel, it is very clear that you have flunked your own test. You've put saving your job, which I actually believe you were being honest about during your confirmation hearings, over doing what's right for the FBI and the American people. That is not adherence to the law. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleladies.
Director Patel, you flunked your own test. That's how Senator Ross opened her questioning. And from that moment, it wasn't just a political clash. It became a moral reckoning. She didn't yell. She didn't grandstand. She just reminded him, word for word, what he promised during his confirmation hearing. No politicization, no retribution, and no bias inside the FBI. Then she began naming the people, real agents with real careers, who lost everything after doing their jobs. Patel tried to stay calm, but his answers came out like a man walking through quicksand. Each question from Ross was a trap he had built for himself. She asked, would hiring FBI agents from only one political party be politicization or performance-based hiring? Patel replied softly, we don't ask applicants their political affiliations. But Ross didn't let him breathe. She fired back. Then why, Director, were agents asked who they voted for in a lawsuit filed against you and the Bureau? The air shifted. Patel froze, hiding behind the phrase every cornered official uses, ongoing litigation. That's when everyone realized this wasn't a debate. It was a revelation. Ross wasn't speculating. She had receipts. She called out the names of agents with decades of service, people with medals, experience, and spotless records, who were suddenly terminated after working on politically inconvenient cases. First, there was Brian Driscoll, a 20-year FBI veteran, Medal of Valor recipient, and a man who literally led the Bureau's critical incident response during ISIS raids. According to Ross, Driscoll refused to answer political questions in his interview, questions about who he voted for, and days later, he was out. Not reassigned, not demoted, fired. Then came Steve Jensen, a senior official who managed counterintelligence and organized crime operations, described by Patel himself as the embodiment of what the FBI should be. Jensen's mistake? Working on the January 6th investigations that some in power didn't want touched. When online attacks started calling him a traitor, he disappeared from the Bureau. And finally, Walter Jardia, a decorated combat veteran who helped lead investigations into foreign interference during the 2016 election and into a certain presidential ally, gone. Decades of service erased in silence. Ross leaned forward, her tone steady. Director Patel, these aren't hypotheticals. These are your decisions. The camera caught Patel's expression, flat but strained. He mumbled about ongoing litigation, standard reviews, and organizational restructuring. But Ross wasn't having it. You said no one would be terminated for their case assignments. You said personnel decisions would be based on performance and adherence to the law. You failed your own test. The thing is, this wasn't just about 3 names. What Ross revealed was a pattern, and patterns tell the real story. The FBI's strength has always come from 2 invisible things: institutional memory, the decades of experience carried by career agents, and perceived neutrality. The moment either one erodes, the system collapses from within. When you remove experienced investigators and replace them with loyalists, you don't just weaken the Bureau. You change what it is. Think about it. When a veteran counterterrorism agent leaves, investigations slow down. Intelligence gaps open. The new hires may be qualified, but they lack the long-term understanding of networks, sources, and threats that took years to build. And when word spreads that people are being pushed out not for misconduct, but for who they investigated, the message to everyone left behind is loud and clear. Stay in line, or you're next. That's why Ross's question about asking agents who they voted for was so chilling. It wasn't emotional, it was efficient. You don't need to fire people if you never hire the ones who'll challenge authority. That's how politicization takes root. It doesn't always look like a mass firing or a viral scandal. Sometimes it's quiet. A reassignment here, a buyout there, changing promotion criteria or budget priorities. Slowly, the culture bends until it breaks, and when that happens, morale collapses. The best agents, the ones who take risks, chase difficult cases, and challenge corruption, either conform or leave. Those who remain start second-guessing every decision. They stop pushing boundaries. They stop asking tough questions. That's not law enforcement anymore. That's bureaucracy. And bureaucracy doesn't fight crime. It survives it, but the consequences don't stop inside the bureau. When the public starts to believe that law enforcement only targets political enemies or protects political friends, something much bigger erodes: trust. And when trust dies, democracy starts bleeding quietly from the inside. People stop believing in accountability. Citizens begin assuming every investigation is biased. And that cynicism is contagious. It spreads fast, infecting everything from juries to journalism to everyday conversations about justice. Ross knew that. She didn't just go after Patel's record. She attacked the foundation of the problem. Because when you start choosing agents based on loyalty instead of skill, you're not just corrupting a system. You're training an entire generation to look the other way. That's not how a republic survives. And here's the part no one talks about: the emotional cost. The people being forced out aren't faceless bureaucrats. They're parents, veterans, survivors of raids and trauma, people who've spent their lives running into danger while the rest of us ran away. When those people are discarded for political convenience, entire communities lose protectors. Cases get delayed, victims get ignored, and leads go cold. Justice becomes selective, not blind. Ross made it clear this wasn't about partisanship. It was about principle. She wasn't asking for a resignation or a soundbite. She was demanding accountability. She challenged Patel not with emotion, but with documentation, lawsuits, testimony, internal reviews. And that's why her words hit harder than any partisan attack ever could. She urged the public to follow the trail, not just the headlines. Look at the lawsuits filed. Read the Inspector General reports. Compare who's being reassigned and why. It's not about one case or one firing. It's about a pattern of behavior that points to something systematic. Because when you see the same kind of personnel decisions happening over and over again, all tied to politically sensitive investigations, it stops being coincidence. It becomes policy. There's a deeper danger in all this: normalization. Once you accept a little bit of politicization, it becomes easier to excuse the next round and the next until the Bureau's entire identity shifts. And by the time the public realizes what's been lost, it's already gone. But there's still a window, a narrow one, for accountability. Congress can compel Patel and his subordinates to hand over internal memos. Inspector General offices can investigate improper dismissals and hiring practices. Whistleblowers can come forward, but only if they're protected from retaliation. And that's where we come in, not as partisans, but as citizens paying attention. Because these safeguards mean nothing if nobody demands they be enforced, and enforcement starts with awareness, with refusing to tune out, with remembering the names of those agents who stood up, served honorably, and were cut down because they wouldn't bend. When we forget their names, the system that silenced them wins. Patel's silence in that hearing said more than any prepared statement could. Every "I can't comment" and every ongoing litigation echoed through the room as proof of something bigger, that a place meant to be above politics has started answering to it. Ross didn't need him to confess. She just needed him to not deny. And in that silence, the truth hung heavy. If you listen closely, you'll notice how the story mirrors a bigger American pattern. Institutions crumble not because of one dramatic act, but through quiet compromise, bit by bit, decision by decision. When those decisions are driven by self-preservation instead of duty, the outcome is inevitable. We stop trusting the very people who are supposed to protect us. And it's easy to think this is just another political fight, another headline that'll fade. But it's not, because the stakes here aren't abstract. They're deeply human. When experienced agents are replaced by loyalists, the ones who suffer aren't politicians. They're families waiting for justice, victims of trafficking, children caught in exploitation networks, and communities targeted by hate crimes. Every time an investigator is pushed out for political reasons, someone's story stays unsolved. Ross ended her questioning with a line that should haunt anyone watching. "You've put saving your job above doing what's right for the FBI and the American people." That sentence wasn't just directed at Patel. It was aimed at every official who's ever looked away when institutions were quietly compromised. Because silence is complicity. And in moments like this, silence from those in power speaks volumes. The truth is, no institution, not even one as powerful as the FBI, is immune to decay. But that decay only accelerates when the public stops paying attention. When hearings like this are dismissed as political theater, real accountability slips through the cracks. And that's exactly why moments like Ross's confrontation matter, because they force us to look, even when it's uncomfortable to the next time you hear the words ongoing litigation or I can't comment. Remember what that usually means. Someone, somewhere, doesn't want you to know what's really going on. And maybe, just maybe, that's when you should start asking harder questions. Because the real threat isn't what happens behind closed doors. It's what happens when we stop demanding they be opened. If you've watched this far, it means you care about truth, accountability, and justice. And that matters. So don't let this conversation end here. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Not for the algorithm, but because the only way to keep the light on in places where power hides is to make sure people are still watching.